The Tim Heale Podcasts. Ordinary people's extraordinary stories.
Welcome to the Tim Heale Podcast. In this episode, I'm going to have a chat with Sandie. Sandie, if you can tell me when and where you were born, and if you can describe what it was like where you grew up, the schools you went to, and the education that you received.
Hey Tim, how are you? Thanks for having me on. So I was born in May of 1974 in Thurles in Tipperary in Ireland. And I think it was just, there is a song about that. It's a long
way to Tipperary.
That's the one. So I was born just after, I think ABBA had just won the Eurovision, just for reference, if anybody remembers, is old enough to remember when ABBA won the Eurovision. And I was named after a British singer called Sandie Shaw, who was on the radio the morning that I was born.
So she also won the Eurovision.
Did she win the Eurovision? I knew she'd sang in the Eurovision, but I wasn't sure she'd won it or not.
Puppet on the String, I think it was.
That's the one, I know. And the funny thing is that I'm always in my bare feet. And I didn't know that about her. But she did send me a signed photo for my 40th birthday a few years ago. So that was nice. To Sandie from Sandie. So if you imagine Ireland like a teddy bear, okay, so where I am is like the belly button of the teddy bear. So right kind of in the center. So the town that I grew up in, Thurles, very Catholic as I was growing up. There's a college in the center of town. It's not anymore, but it used to be where all the Catholic priests were trained. So every morning at 8 o'clock, you used to see hundreds of student priests processing across the street to the cathedral. So it was very Catholic dominated. And I decided the cathedral, there's 2 convent schools, and I went to one of those convent schools for 13 years. So all nuns and religion and crosses and crucifixes, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, very, very much embedded in the Catholic faith. That said, I come from a long line of readers. So even though my family were very Catholic, they still always had a connection to the spirit world, which we'll come to later. So I suppose I got a first and second level education there, like very good education, normal education as other people would. But being a daughter of a single mother, there was no opportunity to go straight from school to college. So I went off on my travels instead. And at 17, I boarded a plane with my backpack and went to live in Germany. And I stayed there for a little while. And then I came back to London with the idea of staying in London for a summer before going over to the States. But I met somebody and fell in love and didn't leave London for several years at that point.
Anyway, we've kind of raced ahead a little bit. So let's take you back to Tipperary.
Reverse.
Let's have a look at your junior years in school.
Mm-hmm.
So you said that it was predominantly nuns that you were teaching you.
Yes, Sister Bonaventure was my first teacher in school. I remember her well.
So what was it like being taught by nuns?
Well, I don't know or didn't know any different. So to me, it was just normal. And I mean, to be fair to nuns, they're just like any other person. They just have this religious belief. And the majority of them are fine. I did have one teacher when I was about 7. It was the year I got my first Holy Communion. And she was a weapon, shall we say, okay? She suffered with her mental health and she would be in and out of institutions. So why she was actually left teaching a class of 7-year-old girls, I'll never understand. But nonetheless, because she came out of hospital one time and we had a student teacher in, and she literally walked into the classroom, grabbed this teacher by her ponytail and pulled her out of the classroom. So she was very much, but very much, there wasn't many of them, the majority of them. And I had one teacher when I was about 11 and 12 years old, Sister Evelyn Russell. And I wrote to her for years after she left because she was transferred to a different convent. And I just resonated with her. We just had this really good connection. And we were pen pals for many, many years, throughout my life. And she was a lovely, lovely soul. So I suppose I'd have to say, really having nuns as teachers, apart from the odd one, but you're going to get the odd teacher here and there that is a bit odd, that, is horrible or takes a dislike to you. Being taught by nuns is no different. They're just women, okay, who've taken a vow. And I suppose, yes, I do have a strong belief in my Catholic faith still. So I know a lot of people now. I'm not going to take away, a lot of people have had a lot of negative stuff happen with the Catholic Church. Okay, but it happens in a lot of churches, it happens in a lot of institutions. I'm lucky personally, I didn't have anything bad happen to me, thankfully. Okay, but I would have to say for the majority of the time, I didn't notice any different. Now, the last 2 years of my education, I did go to a different school. I came out of the convent school and I went to a co-ed school, which was a huge eye-opener for me. That was when I was a teenager.
So the convent school was all girls, was it?
It was all girls. It was mixed. They're changing it now next year, but at the moment it's mixed up until the age of 7. Boys and girls go to school together. So I think, as far as I'm aware, I could be wrong on this, but the thinking seems to have been that the nuns would look after the babies, if you like, the 4, 5, and 6 and 7-year-olds. And then once they got to that age, then they split them. And the boys went to the Christian Brothers School, which we still have here in town as well. And my boys went there. So, but the brothers or the monks, they would only take the kids from 7 or 8. They wouldn't look after the babies. So we were mixed up until First Holy Communion. And then we'd go on in the convent school as girls. The boys moved to the Christian Brothers School. So, yeah.
Now, I have a question about Holy Communion at that age.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Did you get a sip of wine or was it substituted?
I don't remember getting wine. No, I don't believe that we ever got wine at that age. I could be wrong, but I don't like wine, so I probably just didn't take it. Personally, I don't drink alcohol at all. But no, the First Communion is about the host. It's about the body of Christ. Now, I don't remember getting wine. I don't remember ever having got wine. You have the choice, obviously, at Mass as an adult, but it's not seen as wine. It's the blood of Christ. Yeah. But no, I've never taken it.
All right, just wondered. No. I mean, whether they start you off early on the road to drink.
No, you get your First Holy Communion, and then a few years later, so about the age of 12, you get what's called your confirmation. And your confirmation is where you personally take your vow to the church. You're confirming your faith in the church and your, I suppose, affiliation, if you like, to the church. So as a baby, your parents and your godparents would take that vow on your behalf. So then when you have your confirmation, you take that vow for yourself. And back in the day, they don't do this anymore. But when I was at school all them years ago, we used to take a pledge as well at the same time. And that was a pledge to stay off of alcohol until you got to the age of 18. So everybody used to take that. Now everything is different because my son was confirmed there a couple of years ago, and they didn't get the pledge anymore. So we had to go directly to the Pioneers Association for him to take his pledge. And I asked them why they don't do it, and they're not allowed to come into schools anymore. There's a lot more laws and regulations about who is allowed into schools, who's allowed to talk to children and whatever. So he took his pledge outside of that. We did that personally. But back in my day, you would take the pledge. So no wine. No wine at all. Not until you're over 18. But a lot of people, of course, would have broken the pledge. So it is, I suppose, I don't think it's that dissimilar from Church of England. I don't know, do they have First Communion and stuff, but the faith is generally the same. There's only a few differences in that. I think the Church of England doesn't believe in the Virgin Mary or the, worshipping Our Lady, whereas we would. And I think divorce as well is one main.
I think the Church of England, for like the likes of me, is like I'm just a sort of hatch 'em, match 'em, dispatch 'em type Christian type person. So I
So,
saw the odd christening, wedding, or funeral.
and I had this discussion. I had this discussion with a priest recently because I was lucky enough to meet near. Of course, I grew up in Thurles Town, and just 3 miles outside Thurles Town is a village called Holy Cross Village. And I would have spent a lot of time there growing up because my aunt and uncle and cousins lived there. And in this church in Holy Cross, it's called Holy Cross because they actually have a piece of the original cross that Jesus was crucified on. Okay, whether you believe that Jesus was the Son of God or not, they have a piece of the cross. Hence, it's called Moncheir na Crisha, which was actually the bed of the cross. Okay, so when the British came over, everything was anglicized, and it's called Holy Cross. So I've totally forgot my point now. I go off on a tangent explaining things, and then I forget what I'm talking about. But I've completely lost my train of thought. What was the question? I can't remember.
We were talking about communion.
Yeah, I can't remember my point about Holy Cross now. But yeah, we were talking about communion and confirmation. And look, it is I think that the two religions, I think that they're very similar. And I really don't see the fact that, and historically, I suppose in Ireland, because the people that came over, the British that came over and were given the lands, were all Protestant. And I think that's where there's this idea that everyone in Ireland, that we're all Catholic and we hate Protestants, and that's not actually the case. I can tell you it's far from the case. Nobody asks you on the street what religion you are, and we have, every town has a Protestant church and a Catholic church. So, and now as times are changing, every town almost has a mosque now as well. Everybody needs somewhere to practice their faith, and nobody is going to stop anybody practicing their faith. And I think, the world is changing and times are changing. So I suppose just because of the fact that we grew up in a Catholic town, it doesn't mean that we're closed to everybody else. And that college, because as we all know, the Catholic Church has been declining in numbers of priests over the last number of years. And so that college where all the priests were trained it doesn't train priests anymore, it actually trains teachers. So they train teachers in theology, business, Irish, several different subjects. So it's still being put to use, and the theology is taught by the priests. So they still have kind of input into the education as well. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, a lot of people would say it's a bad thing. I can't say that I've been put under any disadvantage having been taught by Catholic priests or nuns, but I would not take away from those that have, because there are some horror stories. But then if you go back and ask my mother went to what we call here a national school. So they're little country schools, if you like. There's primary schools dotted all over the countryside, and we would refer to them as national schools. And my mother would have gone to one of those like back in the 50s and 60s. And she tells horrific stories of the teachers then. And they weren't nuns or priests, but they were treated terribly. My mother, one of my mother's brothers, he was a right toe rag back in the day. He used to spend days on end locked in the cloakroom, with no food or water or toilet or anything. So there are horrific stories from, I think, everything if you go looking for them. Yeah. But my personal experience was good. I have to say I did enjoy it. But then I wanted to be a nun when I was that age. For many years, I wanted to be a nun.
So moving on, then you moved away from the Catholic school and you went to the co-ed.
The co-ed school. I did. I remember why I was talking about Holy Cross. Let me go back for a minute. You were talking about only being a churchgoer for weddings and christenings and stuff. I met a guy. He was a Father Ermelindo de Capa, and he was the sidekick of a guy called Padre Pio that you might have heard of. Okay, one of our Catholic saints, and he had the wounds of the cross, the nails in his hands. And so this guy was his sidekick, and obviously we know Padre Pio died some years ago, But this guy had the gloves that belonged to Padre Pio, and he used to come every single year. They have a weekend of masses and dedication to Padre Pio in this church in Holy Cross. And I was lucky enough that on the weekend of my son's first Holy Communion, we got to meet Father Ermelindo de Capa. Funnily enough, we went to a hotel for a meal after the communion service, and he happened to be there having his dinner with one or two of the people that run the event. And he came over to talk to us because we had my youngest son's christening and my eldest son's communion on the same weekend. And he came over to bless the two boys. And he told us at that time that if you go to Mass 4 times a year, try and go every quarter, and for special occasions like Easter, Christmas, stuff like that. He said, it's mostly how you live your life and how you treat other people that gets you into heaven. So he said, it's not going and, kneeling at an altar while you live the rest of your life in sin, So I was having this discussion with a priest who said that he was wrong. And I said, everybody's going to differ on things. You have to take what works for you out of something. And if you have enough belief that christenings and weddings are important enough to have in a church, then I believe that's enough, and that it's how you live your life. I'm not a theologian, and I'm definitely not a nun, but that's my take on it. And it was, Father Ermelindo has passed since, but that was his take on it. And my son lives by that. He says, I don't have to go to Mass every Sunday. So he has his lie on in bed.
That's fair enough.
So when I went to secondary school, my first 3 years of secondary school was in the convent. It was the same convent school. The two schools were on the same grounds. And I changed school then in 5th year, which was when you're getting ready. So it would be like the equivalent of starting the A-levels. Now, I could have gone on in the school, but as it happened, I got very disillusioned in my faith at that point, and we really had another weapon as headmistress at that time, and she took a particular dislike to me. And I'd gone from someone who loved school, loved my faith, actually wanted to be a nun, to absolutely hating it, And I'd been through a lot of loss that same year. I lost 2 family members that same year, so it was a really difficult time for me. I'd just turned 15 that summer, and so I really didn't want to go back to school. So my mother changed me to a different school. It was a co-ed school, and I suppose it was probably the best thing that happened to me, because I was as quiet as a mouse back then, and I didn't know what to say to boys, because I was raised by a single mother. I didn't have any brothers, so I didn't know how to talk to boys. So I'd say my first 6 months in this co-ed school, I probably didn't talk to anybody. But it was the best thing for me. And it was like going from, I don't know, like moving from a convent to a cattle mart. Okay, you're a boy. You probably remember what you were like when you were 15, 16 years old. They're rough. There was no more. In the convent school, we all had to be dressed properly. We had to have our knee socks. We had to walk on the left-hand side of the corridor. Then you go to a school where everybody just races down the corridor at, max speed and bumps into everyone and hits them with their shoulder and stuff. So it was a real... it was real baptism of fire, if you like, going out to that school. But I have to say, I loved it. I really did. And I stayed on an extra year because I was very young when I did my leaving cert, which would be the equivalent to the A-levels there. I'd only just turned, I turned 17 actually after I finished my exams. So I wanted to go that year, but my mother talked me into staying on an extra year. So I did a secretarial course, which was a big thing back in the day. Because there was no money to go to college, even though I got a place to study law in university in Cork, but we couldn't afford it. No ifs, buts, and 2 ways about it. It just wasn't doable at that time. And that was another reason why there were so many boys in training to be priests at the time, because education was so expensive. But if you went into the seminary, you got a free education and you could leave afterwards with your degree. So a lot of boys did that. But the girls really didn't go for the convents so much, because all the convents would do was make you into a teacher. And if you didn't want to be a teacher, it was no good. So when I finished the secondary school and the secretarial course, And then I packed my bags and went to Germany for a little while.
So how did you find Germany?
I love
Whereabouts in
Germany.
Germany?
So I was in a place called Roth unter Riedberg. So it's down kind of near the Swiss border. It's kind of down southwest of Germany. It's about 100 kilometers southwest of Frankfurt is where it is. And it's a real little village. It's on what's called the Weinplatz. So it's all vineyards. It's all winemakers in this area. And it's countryside, I suppose. So coming from the countryside in Ireland to the countryside in Germany, it was lovely. The weather was better in Germany, though, I have to say. It was a lot warmer than it is in Ireland. And I was just working in a hotel, waitressing and, working in the bar and stuff. And I loved it. But I suppose I was lonely. I didn't have fluent German, and there weren't many young people where I was. So where I was working, so it's called Roth unter Riedberg. So the village is Roth, and the mountain that the village sits under is Riedberg Mountain, and you can get a cable car up to the top of the mountain. So it was one of those places where everybody used to come for like health kicks. They'd all wear their lederhosen, they'd have their big walking sticks, and they'd go walking up the mountain. So it was really kind of health kick place. So I was like, 17, 18 years old, and everybody was in their 50s and 60s and 70s. So there wasn't many young people. So after a few months, I started to get itchy feet, and, I was lonely. So I decided then that I would come back to the UK, get some work, and move to the States. That's where I was supposed to be headed.
So what made you go to Germany in the first place? Were you able to speak German to start with, or did you
Nur ein bisschen, just a little bit. I did A-level German. Yeah, ich habe es alles vergessen. I had done A-level German here, and I'd been to Germany on a school tour. We went to Germany on a school tour when I was 14 years old, and we went to Heidelberg, and I just fell in love with the place. I just fell in love with it. It was just beautiful. And so where I wasn't too far from Heidelberg, and there was a German army, not a German, I beg your pardon, an American army base nearby. So, we got all the English radio. We were able to go to some of the events, meet some of the people. But it wasn't something that we were able to do, all the time, obviously. So, yeah.
Why did you pick that particular area?
Just because I got a job.
All right. So you applied before you went?
Yeah, I got it through an agency. Yeah. So there was an agency in Dublin, and so you could go working like as a nanny, or you could, work in a hotel or restaurant or whatever. So they had all kinds of jobs. So I'd worked in hotels while I was at school all the time. I'd worked in bars, restaurants, chambermaid, the whole lot. So I thought, well, I can do it. So why not take that job, whereas I was the youngest in my family. I wasn't, I wasn't familiar with kids and changing nappies and stuff like that. So being a nanny definitely wasn't one for me. So I said I'd go with the hotel job, and you could live in, and, so everything was there for me. So, and actually it was while I was in Germany that I started to get back in touch with my spirituality. I don't know if you want me to raise ahead to that, but I kind of pushed away. I was talking about going through a hard time, after. So when I was 14, my granddad was very sick, and my granddad was just the love of my life. And he was widowed, and he came to stay with us when he was ill, but he passed away in May of 1989 when I was 14 years old. And 10 weeks later, my uncle Kevin, who was like my older brother, he was killed in a motorcycle accident just after my 15th birthday. And that was huge. Like those two losses were huge for me. And I kind of pushed away from my spirituality. So I was somebody that had always seen spirit from when I was a young child. And I thought, well, if you can't do anything for me, if you couldn't even save Kevin from his crash, what good are you to me? And I pushed them away. But when I was in Germany, I used to go out jogging. And so I used to be off for a few hours every afternoon, and I'd go jogging, and it was like miles and miles and miles of vineyards on every side that you looked. You know, there was nobody around, and you would only see a car, you know, once every hour or whatever. Apart from like 8 o'clock in the morning when people go to work, and 5 o'clock when they're coming home, you'd have about 10 minutes traffic, and then that would be it. So I was out jogging one afternoon it was about, I don't know, 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and it was really, really hot. And I had my beautiful, if you remember, the 1990s headphones on with the orange foam on them, and my personal cassette player. And I was listening to Simon and Garfunkel. And next thing I heard really clearly, someone shouted at me to run. And I thought, okay, someone's behind me now taking the, you know, the proverbial. So I looked around, expecting to see somebody laughing at me. There was nobody there. And I was like, what? So anyway, I kept running anyway. And next thing I heard this, run. And I was like, I am running. Somebody's really taking the piss. So I took off my headphones and I turned around. And I thought maybe there was somebody hiding in the vineyard or something. And I said, what? And it was silence. Next thing, this car drove past. Okay, now you never see a car, especially at that time of the afternoon. And it was a car, it was a small black hatchback. And you know when a car is passing and the music is really, really loud, and it's like doof, 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 doof. This car drove past. And I can still see it in my head in slow motion. There was about 4 or 5 guys in this car, and they all stared at me and I stared at them, but the car just drove past and kept going. Next thing I heard this voice, and it said, run like F. Okay, run now. So I thought, oh my God. So I turned into the vineyard and I ran down about halfway down the vineyard, and then I jumped in between 2 vines, 2 bushes. And I said, oh my God, I feel so stupid. Thank God nobody can see me, right? So anyway, with that, the car came back. I heard the music and the car came back. And the vineyard kind of sloped away from the road, so I could see up to the road, and the car stopped. And these 5 guys got out of the car. And they were talking in German, but all I could hear was my heart beating. You know, when you're so scared, you can only hear your heart beating. I couldn't make out what they were saying. And they started searching. They spread out and started searching in the vineyards, and they were beating against the bushes as they were going by. And I thought, oh my God, they're looking for me. They spent about 20 minutes looking before they gave up, and they got in the car and left again. And I was like, oh my God. One fellow was only about 3 meters from me when they stopped looking. I was getting ready to run. And even after they left, I waited another 20 minutes before I jumped out and I headed home. And I went the back way, obviously, around by the fields. but it was years later. I didn't really get what had happened. You don't think at that age, you know. Years later, I remember reading an article in a magazine about a girl in the States who had taken a lift from a trucker. Anyway, long story short, they stopped for something to eat. She went into the bathroom and she heard a voice telling her to run. And she didn't. And the voice said, you know, climb out the window and run. And she looked, and there was a window in the bathroom, but it was quite high up. And she said, I'd have had to climb on the sink to climb out the window. And she said, I thought it was by imagination. And she didn't run. And that guy kept her for 8 years before she managed to escape. And I thought, you know, what would have happened if I hadn't have ran that day? You know? So someone in spirit was watching over me, no matter how much I pushed them away, told them I didn't want to connect with them anymore and all this. So that was kind of my big take from Germany. I learned to listen to myself again. But anyway, the following year, then I came home I came as far as London. I have a lot of family in London. And I said I'd spend the summer there and then go over to the States. But obviously, I ended up spending 3 years in London because I met the guy that I'm actually now married to. And so when I was in London, I started working for the Nationwide Building Society. I worked with them for about a year or so. And then I worked with the Financial Times for nearly 3 years. Yeah, over there. And I loved it. But when I was kind of getting to the stage where they wanted me to start traveling, so I worked for the international section. Again, I show my age, and I talk about an age before we had the internet at our fingertips. We used to sell a dial-up service where, you know, reporters and researchers could dial in and, you know, get the information that they wanted. And so I was kind of coming to the stage where they wanted me to start traveling to like Asia and places like that. And I didn't want to be on the road all the time. I saw the other people there that was doing that. And I was kind of getting to the stage where I kind of wanted to go home. I was in my early 20s and I wanted to go home for a while. So I returned to Ireland. So do I have anything mad to say about my time in London? Probably not. Had a fair few cocktail evenings down in Covent Garden. I remember all those. But mostly it was kind of, work and motorbikes. Back in those days, some people, if they're down the London area, might remember going to Chelsea Bridge every Friday night. That's where all the people on motorbikes used to meet. And that's where I spent every Friday night for 3 years, down in Chelsea Bridge. And maybe out to Box Hill on some Sundays as well. And you kind of go from Box Hill and then you'd have a drive down the motorway down to some service station near Wales, and then you drive back, and just to get out with other bikers and stuff. And
Round
my
to the
husband
Ice
used to,
Calf.
yes. So my husband used to do a lot of motorbike racing. When I met him back there, and I learned I had always had an interest. I was brought up around motorbikes, so I did my CBT when I was living in London, and I had my own little bike for going in and out to work, a beautiful CG 125. And then when I moved home to Ireland, I got an Aprilia Futura, so I never really went past the 125 mark. I'm a bit vertically challenged in that regard. So anything above that, my husband had a GSX-R 1100 on the road. So we kind of used to go around on that most of the time. So then I suppose I came back to Ireland after my time in London, and went into banking first because I'd worked at the Nationwide Building Society. I went working for the Bank of Ireland. I was lucky enough, they actually gave me a job over the telephone interview. Back in the day, we didn't have this video call stuff. So it was a telephone interview, and I got a job in my local branch of the Bank of Ireland in Thurles. So I came home, and my boyfriend at the time diligently followed me, packed up his life in London and diligently followed me home to Ireland, as he should. And we're still here. But I suppose then I spent 13 years working in education. So I worked for a third level college. So it was Limerick Institute of Technology. It's now rebranded. It's now the Technological University of the Shannon, I think it's called now. But I worked with them for 13 years. Until again Spirit came calling, and I had several things happen in my own personal life that pushed me back towards my spirituality, and just accidentally I got into this career that I do now. So moved back to Ireland, and as I say, I was working for the bank, and then I was on the road a lot when I was with the bank. I used to travel. I could be in Galway today, in Dublin tomorrow, Cork the day after. I used to travel around a lot. So there was a new college opening up in town, LIT, which is now the Technological University of the Shannon. And I applied for a job there, and I got it, which was great because, we just got married and wanted to start a family. And who wants to be on the road when you have a family?
Absolutely.
So the college was just around the corner.
What job did you do in the bank if you were traveling around a bit? Were you
So
like
I
a
used
relief
to,
manager, or?
so relief staff, exactly. So if they were short staffed, or if there was a new branch opening up, you'd go and get it started and then move on to somewhere else. So it was always relief work. So where they needed, someone to fill in. So it could just be literally like last minute. I could get a phone call at like 9 o'clock in the morning in Dublin and say, go to Sligo now, and you just have to get there as quickly as you could. So it was all relief work. But back in those days, as I say, it wasn't for the love of banking. It was that it was very good money. So you might earn, £1,000 as it was in the day a month on your wages. You could get £2,500 in the month on expenses. So it was one of the more sought after jobs at the time. So that paid for our wedding and our first house. So hey, at the end of the day, you don't go to work because you love it, you go because you have to eat. Isn't that the truth?
Absolutely. That's the right way to take it. You don't live to work, that's for sure. You work to live.
Exactly. That's it. But as I say, once we were married and we were looking to start a family, I wanted a job that was closer to home. The new college was opening up. It was just around the corner, really, from the house where we were living at the time. And it was just perfect. And we had our first son while we lived there. But when a few years ago now, God, it must be coming up to 10 years, I started, I have to go into the spiritual stuff now because this is where my life really changed. And I
Yeah.
don't know if you've ever heard of numerology, but I had my numerology done some years ago. And it said that when I changed my name, and I was just married, and it said when I changed my name that I would reconnect with my spirituality, because as Sandie Ryan, as I was before I got married, and now I'm Sandie Byrne. As Sandie Byrne, I have a much more spiritual connection, which is really weird. But anyway,
Mm.
according to the numerology, it was. So one night I went to see a medium, and mediums don't often come to the town that I live in. But at the time, we have a little theatre in our town now, which was just new at the time, and a medium from the UK came to do readings. And she was on stage, and I was just completely mesmerized by her. And in the interval, there was a couple sitting in front of us. Me and my mother had gone, and I could feel the tension from them. And I tapped the lady on the shoulder. I said, "I'm sorry to interrupt." I said, "But," I said, "don't leave." And I was like, "What are you saying? What are you saying?" And I couldn't stop myself. And I said, "Your son is here. He just doesn't want to leave you to go on stage and talk to that woman." And I started telling her about this young man that had died, and, all these different things, personal information and whatever. And that woman, she just stood up and she gave me a big hug. And she said, "He's actually our grandson." She said, "But we raised him from a baby. And he had died just a couple of years beforehand." And she gave me this huge big hug. So at the end of the show, when the lady was finished on stage and had left the stage and everything, that moment when everyone stops clapping? This lady stood up and she said, "Guys, if anybody wants a reading, never mind that woman on the stage. You want to go and see this girl sitting behind me." And I was like, what? So anyway, loads of people started coming up to me, asking me for my phone number and everything. By the end of the night, I had 3 months worth of bookings. And I was like, "Hey, this is great." So I cut down work, my full-time job. I cut it down to 4 days a week. I ended up cutting it down to 3 days a week. And then I ended up taking a career break to do this full-time. And I've never looked back. I really haven't looked back. But I'm of the firm belief that if you trust in spirit, they'll always pay out, So I always put my trust into spirit. I don't know how spiritual you are, Tim. Do you believe in the whole afterlife and everything?
Well, I hope so. That's where I'm going.
But are you going up or down, Tim? Are you going up or down?
I don't know yet. I'm certainly going to come back. Going to come back as a cat.
Oh, 100%, 100%. I have 2 cats by, and they're the most spoiled cats ever. I don't believe in the heaven or hell as we would have been taught as Christians, to be honest with you. I think that's a way of, teaching people and maybe keeping them in line, if you like. But I don't believe that anybody burns in hell for eternity. It's just not what I've experienced from my years of connecting with spirit. Can I go into talking about my family now? Because I feel like I've
Yeah.
skipped out what was a huge part of my life. I mean, the education and everything's important. And, even I have 2 boys that can connect with
Yeah.
spirit, but I still always say to them, get educated. And I did go back to college. I went back to Dublin City, or University College Dublin, in my 20s. And so I did go to college eventually, but I paid for it myself. So I suppose the whole spiritual side and the feeling comfortable with spirit, it does come from my family. I do come from generations of readers. Okay. I learned to read tea leaves as a young girl from my grandmother. And she learned to read from her mother, and she learned to read from her mother, and so on and so forth, back throughout my mother's side of the family. My great grandmother, Ellen Keating, she was a very well-known reader back in the day. Okay, back in the days before people all had telephones in their houses, people used to come up and queue up outside her cottage from 6 o'clock in the morning, waiting to be read. She was just very well known in the area, and people used to travel from all over the country to come and see her as well. And my grandmother, God rest her soul, she was only 56 when she passed. And she'd had 10 children, so she didn't really have time for reading people. She used to read for friends and family, just, the tea leaves and stuff. but she had a huge connection to spirit. And that was, I think, where my understanding of the spirit world came from. You know, as a child, as I said, my mother was on her own, so we used to spend a lot of time at my grandparents' house. We used to get the bus to their house every morning. And if, you know, sometimes like the door would open or something in the house just randomly. And my grandmother would always take another cup out of the press and she'd fill it up with tea and she'd say, come and sit down and have tea with us, you know. So her belief was always that, you know, the spirit was around us. So I suppose when I started seeing spirit, I never thought of it as a strange thing because I was just always aware of them around us, you know. And I suppose I don't really remember a time I don't see spirit. But the first time that I knew that, or realized, I suppose, that it was something that not everybody sees, I always remember it because I was 7 years old, and that's when my grandmother died. And we had been at the hospital with her earlier, and then we came back and she'd just passed. And my mother left me sitting with my grandmother, my nanny, as I call her, while she went to the nurse's office to call her brothers and sisters. No mobile phones back in 1982. And so I was sitting by my granny, my nanny, and I was holding her hand. I didn't know what passed away meant, you know. I didn't. I was only 7 years old. So I was sitting there holding her hand, talking to her. I thought she was just asleep. You know, I thought passed away was the same as passed out, you know. And even though I was sitting there holding her hand, talking to her, she was standing behind me playing with my hair. My grandmother used to love my hair because I had this long red hair and, you know, she used to play with it and plait it and all that kind of stuff. And I was chatting away to her. And I remember the nurse, because the curtains were pulled around her, and the nurse took her head and she goes, "Are you calling me, love?" And I was like, "No, I'm just talking to Nanny." And she went, "Okay." And she went back out again. So it was then when everybody started to arrive in, my granddad, my uncles, all that kind of stuff, she just disappeared. And then we were at the funeral afterwards, a couple of days later. And my uncle Kevin, who was like, you know, he was the bodybuilder, he was the like big brother type for me. And he was really upset. And I was like to my mother, and I was like, you know, why is Kevin, you know, crying? And somebody said, "Oh, Nanny's gone to live up in heaven with Holy God." And I said, "But she's not. She's over there beside Granddad." You know, and then somebody said to me, "Oh, shut up talking nonsense." You know the way people do. So I hid under the table for the rest of the day. And that was the first time that I realized that not everybody could see what I was seeing. But my poor mother came and sat under the table with me. She was great. She was always so understanding, God bless her. And she just said, look, not everybody understands, but that she understood, because my mother was very, very close with her mother as well. And even though she didn't necessarily see or connect with spirits in the same way, I suppose she was working 3 different jobs. Who has time? When you're a single mother of 2 girls, you don't get time to talk to spirit. But you know, she understood and she talked to her mother, and her mother had explained it all to her over the years. So I wouldn't say it was encouraged, but it wasn't discouraged at the same time. You know, whenever I talked about anything, you know, my mother seemed to understand, you know. And she says to me that even when I was growing up, when I was a young girl and I used to talk about this man or that man, she'd never say that must be this person or that must be that person. She was very clever. She used to put out pictures of like her granddad, you know, or her uncle or whatever around the house and see if I'd recognize them. And then like I'd go, "Oh, that's the man I was talking to the other night," or "That's the woman I saw," or whatever, you know, and she'd kind of figure out who I was seeing it that way. So it was really when I that when I was just turned 15 and Kevin had his motorbike accident, and I wasn't with him the weekend that he died. He was gone off racing, but I'd spent all the week before with him working on the bike, getting it ready for the race. And so when he had the crash, some of the family went up to see it, but my mother thought that I was too young, you know, to for that at that time. So 10 days after his crash, and we'd had some signs from him in these 10 days beforehand, but 10 days after the crash, I just talked to him and I said, "Kevin," I said, "did we do something wrong?" You know, because, you know, even though I was young, I was just handing him this, you know, screwdriver or a wrench or whatever it was. I wasn't like literally doing all the work, obviously, but I still couldn't get it out of my head. Like, had we done something wrong? Did something fail in the engine, you know, because they said he'd pulled down the bike. And I said, can you tell me what happened? I need to know what happened. So that night in my dream, I saw it. And literally, as he would have seen it, I could see the helmet, I could see the road, I could feel the no brakes, the whole lot. And literally what had happened to him was that as he was coming down the long straight, he realized he had no brakes. So he tried to pull the bike down. And, anybody that has raced bikes or been on bikes, 9 times out of 10, you'll go to the left or right, the bike will go the other direction. But as it happened, there was a house there and a brick wall outside the house. And the bike hit the brick wall and came back and hit him and dragged him into the ditch. So he had horrendous injuries. But I saw this like frame by frame in slow motion in my dream. So when I came downstairs the following morning, I described it to my mother. Now, I'd never been to this track before. I'd never, seen anything. And I told her exactly what had happened, exactly what the road was like, exactly where the house was, exactly what color the wall was, and exactly where Kevin had ended up and all this kind of stuff. And I said to her, there was a nut missing from the brake lines and air got into the brake fluid. And she looked at me and she says, oh, we don't know that. But she was like, yes, that's, everything that I described was exactly it. So 15 months later at the inquest, they came out and they said the nut was missing from the brake line. Air got into the brake lines, he had no brakes. So I suppose that's really when I started to take it a lot more seriously, even though at the same time I was pushing them away. I knew that I could ask. There's like this, I suppose it's a real kind of naive kind of outlook with children, I suppose. You can kind of push things away, but if you ask, somebody will always be there, and it was kind of that kind of thing. I knew they were there, but I kind of was we would say tick over here, that I was tick with them. I kind of was sulking, if you like, because of the fact that, they wanted me to listen to them. They wanted me to give people messages for them, but yet they couldn't save him from a crash, but there had been lots of signs, even in the week before his death, of what was going to happen to him. And he gave us lots of signs, after his death, that he was still around. So I suppose between then, when I was 15 and when I was 17, when I was in Germany, I didn't connect a lot with spirit. I did push it away because I was heartbroken. I won't lie to you. I just lost my granddad 10 weeks before, and then Kevin's accident on top of that. It kind of changed my whole outlook on everything that I knew before. Even though I was raised by a single mother, we had a very stable upbringing, a very loving, very close-knit family. I would say my childhood was happy. It was really happy. I mean, after my parents separated, it was happy. When they were arguing, it wasn't. But then my parents separated, the arguments stopped. My mother was happier, and we had great support from my mother's side of the family. Never saw my father for about 20 years after that. But anyway, that's a whole other story. So, everything started to fall apart. So we went from the huge family unit that we'd had to within 10 weeks having lost, that kind of support. So definitely started to push away. And then I was in Germany and that. And then, as I say, I came back here and I just happened to be at a show one night. And then I said to my mother, let's look into this more. In the UK, I think spirituality is embraced a lot more than it is here in Ireland, and maybe because of the hold, I suppose, that the Catholic Church had on the country, and they probably would still send me straight to hell. But we did go to see another show then in Limerick. It was a guy called Colin Fry. He was from the UK, and he was with a lady called TJ Higgs, who's also from the UK. And I went to see that show, and I bought his book and went up to get it signed afterwards. And TJ, the lady, and Colin Fry, they were sitting together and they just started giving me a reading. And he said to me, but you're a medium. He said, all the spirit that's around you, he started talking to me. And I was like, who are you talking to? I said, I'm not a medium, And it just kind of started happening from there. I can't tell you, apart from the night in the theatre in Thurles, people just found me. And that's kind of what always surprised me. Okay, I'm one of those people. My husband always says he hated going out anywhere with me because somehow people were always just drawn to telling me their life story. Okay, I could be queuing up at a cash machine to get out cash and I'd have somebody's life story. I'd be in a queue in a supermarket, I would have someone's life story. I'd go to a bar to get a drink, I'd have someone's life story. You know, I've just always been one of these people that people have been drawn to. Or I might have a connection for them and I'd say to them, you know, excuse me, but did this happen to you? Or, you know, there's a man standing beside you. Is this so and so? Now I don't do that anymore because I've had some terrible experiences doing that. That's a very American thing, I have to say. But let's just say not everybody's open to that kind of openness. Okay. But yeah, so over the years, I've really just found that people find me, and I can't even say how, because I'm not a person that advertises so much. I mean, in the last few months, I've been on several podcasts, but that's about it. You know, apart from my own Facebook page, I'm not on magazines or on anywhere else. I always think there's a saying here in Ireland, I don't know if you have it in the UK, that's what's for you won't pass you. Did you ever hear that saying?
No.
So basically, if something's meant to be, it will happen no matter where you go or no matter what you do. If something's meant to happen, it will find you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And no matter how much I ran away from spirit and denied the fact that this is what I was supposed to be doing, it found me eventually. And now I do it full time. So yeah, it's different. It is different. I mean, you know, I'm sure on your show, I mean, you've been in the army for years. You probably meet like people that do all kinds of jobs and careers. But when you tell somebody that you talk to dead people for a living, it's kind of different.
Slightly. So how did lockdown treat you?
Do you know, I have to say that for my business, lockdown was the best thing that ever happened. I would be completely different to everybody else in that when people were locked down, they went looking for something. People got in touch with their spirituality. They were looking for a new path, a new direction. So for me, my business took off during lockdown. Okay. As how did it treat me? I'd have to say I'm an introvert. I really am. I could talk to anybody online, but when I'm in a room with people, I get very intimidated by people's energies. Okay. Whether that's because I'm picking up a lot of stuff off of them or whatever, but I do get very intimidated. So online works. It works for me. I'd actually gone online even before the pandemic. But I'm an introvert. So being here, just me, my husband, and the two boys, it was just heaven. I could live life forever like that. Okay, I'm just an introvert. I hate being out and about. We went to the cinema to see the new Top Gun movie the other night, and I was out of the house after. I was out of the house after dark. I started to get the shakes, you know. So I'm definitely I'm an introvert. So lockdown I could live in lockdown. I really could. Is it the best thing for the world? No. I have two friends who lost sons to suicide during lockdown. So definitely, I know that there's a lot of stuff that's going to take years to repair after the last 2 years, you know, and you don't need to be a psychic or a medium to know that. I think everybody can see the way the fabric of society has broken down over the last couple of years. And we need to get back and reconnect with each other because the way things are going isn't going to work. Everybody in life, you know, I mean, I'm 48 years old now, and I've never known a time like this. I've known people that disagree on things, but they agree to disagree and they can still be friends and they can still be neighbors. And we live in a very polarized society now, and it's not comfortable at all, you know. So the world is changing. I'm not sure for the better. But I don't know what's like in the UK now. We're being threatened with more lockdowns and more mask mandates over here. They brought that out over the weekend. Is that coming out in the UK now as well?
Yeah, there's been a few moots about it, but I don't think it's going to wash this time, that's for sure. I for one, won't be following any of that nonsense again.
No. And I'm not one of those people. I don't like wearing a mask, but I did wear a mask because I don't want to be shouted at. I don't want to be putting anybody in a bad position. But I'm not ever a person that's going to shout at somebody, put your mask on or take your mask off, get a vaccine, don't get a vaccine. I don't know why we can't allow people to make their own decisions these days. Why does everything have to be decided for us? You know.
Well, it won't be decided for me again, that's for sure.
Well, I have to say that, you know, I didn't go out much over those couple of years. I really didn't. My husband is kind of the shopper in this house anyway. So he's used to being married to an introvert at this stage. So yeah, he would have done the majority of, the going out. We were only supposed to go out like once a week to get the main shopping, and we were supposed to we were on a 5-kilometer lockdown here. And you have to go beyond the 5 kilometers from my house to get to a supermarket. So we were supposed to just go like once a week. So it wasn't like you could go to the shop every day for milk, So yeah, it's a funny situation to be in. And I don't know. I mean, we could go into that whole COVID thing. Everybody's got an opinion on it. I'm not a doctor or a health specialist, but I just don't see that it did any good. I mean, now that the figures have come out, apparently, there was only 61 people in Ireland that have COVID-19 as a cause of death on the death cert. I mean, you can't knock a country down for that, Well, so I think freedom of information is everybody's friend at the moment. Get the figures for yourself and make your own mind up.
Absolutely.
But well, yeah, Sandie, I'd have to agree with you. I'd have to agree with you on the whole not obeying. The whole civil disobedience thing, I think, is going to come to the fore should it happen again. And the French are showing their true colours over the weekend. They're showing their unrest. So I think the rest of us could follow suit.
It won't be far behind them, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's for sure. Poor Al Boris, I think he's got it all ahead of him. God love him.
Oh, he's in for a rough old time at the moment.
Yeah, but look, we bring these things in ourselves. So that's kind of my story in a nutshell. I don't know, would you call it an extraordinary life? But maybe some people would. But I do want to say that I'm no different to anybody. And I think people, even if you just make yourself more aware of what goes on around you, like, I'm not special. People say to me, you have a gift. I don't. I have an ability, but it's an ability that everybody has. I liken it to singing. Everybody can sing. Some of us are better at it than others. And I say some of us, I really don't include myself in that because you don't want to hear me sing. But I could take lessons and get better. And it's the same with spirituality. It's like learning a new language. That's all. We all have that ability. We all have experiences where we felt something. We felt maybe someone hugging us, or we felt maybe an animal, rubbing against our legs, or, we've had a door open, or somebody knocking on a wall or something. Everybody's had some experience that they just can't explain. Okay. But I think if you look at it a little bit more, I really believe, that there's someone out there trying to get your attention. And the amount of people, you wouldn't want, last week I deleted 19,000 unread emails because I just figured I'm not going to get through them all. If someone wants me, they'll find me. But the amount of emails I get every day, people saying, I keep seeing 1111, or I keep seeing 33, or, this is happening to me, or I'm seeing a shape of this here. Everybody's seeing something. It's just finding out what it means to you, because what it means to me doesn't matter. It's what it means to you. So I wouldn't necessarily call myself extraordinary. Maybe what I do for a living is a bit out of the ordinary, all right. But as a person, I'm pretty, I think, the same as the next person that you'd meet. Hopefully, anyway. I don't want to be too different.
Well, Sandie,
and that's why.
I think...
No, I was just going to say, I think that's why a lot of children don't talk about what they're experiencing, because as a child, I didn't want to be different from anybody else, So you don't tell people that you see ghosts, if you like, because no child wants to be different. And that's where it comes from. That's why children turn it off once the logical side of their brain starts to kick in at a certain age, 7, 8, 9, 10, and they realize not everybody sees this. I can remember my cousin saying to me one time, we were having a sleepover, either I slept at her house or she slept at my house. We grew up like sisters. And she said to me one night, Sandie, she said, I hear people. And I just said, well, thank God for that, because I see them. So it's just a matter of finding somebody who has a similar experience to you, or someone that understands what you're going through. But it's definitely not a gift, but it is an ability. And just embrace it. because I know you're meant to go, but just let me give you one more example before I leave, if that's okay. Have you ever heard of your parking angels?
Parking angels.
Parking angels,
What?
yeah.
Help you park the car.
Yeah, help me to park the car. So I have a bad back and I can't walk very far without crutches. I've been on crutches now for the last few weeks. I had a car crash years ago, and I always shout out to my parking angels when I'm going somewhere. I need a car parking space right outside this door, or right outside that door, or near the door to the supermarket, or whatever. And my son always laughs at me, but he came into town with me last week and I had my crutches and, I couldn't walk very far and I needed to go and get my prescription or whatever. And I knew it was going to be busy in town. And I just said, I shouted out to my parking angels, said, parking angels, I need a space right outside the door of the chemist. And he was like, my son has just turned 22. And he's like, what are you doing? And I said, I'm asking my parking angels for a parking space. And anyway, just as we came over the bridge to where the chemist is, a car pulled out of space right outside the door of the chemist. And I got parked right outside the door. And I do that all the time. And I'm a firm believer that if you ask for something, that you will get it. I really believe in that. And I believe if you research Noel Edmonds, he's also a huge believer in that. Do you remember Noel Edmonds? I think he does that program with the money in the box. I can't remember what it's called.
Yeah, crinkly bottom.
Is that what he's called? Is it? But as far as I know, he's a big believer. I think he kind of turned to spirituality and all. I can just about remember, I was very young at the time, but he used to have this Saturday night program where he used to get people to do mad things, and someone ended up dying in an accident one time, and he kind of had some kind of breakdown, and then he turned to spirituality and stuff. But he's a huge believer in the whole, if you get what you give kind of a thing, so if you put out there and you're good and you're, if you believe in what you're doing, you'll get it back tenfold from spirit. So I say to people, try it. You don't always get immediate results, but ask your loved ones in spirit to show you a sign. Give them 48 hours and you'll have your sign.
Terrific.
So tell all your listeners to do that now.
Certainly will. Thank you very much, Sandie.
Thank you, Tim. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
And to you.
The Tim Heale Podcasts. Ordinary people's extraordinary stories.